God, may the words of my mouth and the meditation of all of our hearts be acceptable in your sight. You are our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. This Advent season, we have been following stories. Our theme has been the stories within the story. So we've taken a look at all sorts of different stories. We find ourselves again today in the Gospel according to Luke. Luke has a particular way of telling the lesser-known stories, such as, he hints at an innkeeper. He talks about Elizabeth. He goes into much more detail about Mary. You may know from the things Tom and I have shared up to this point that the Gospel of Luke is quite concerned with the marginalized. It gives voice to women unlike any other gospel in our Bible. Luke always highlights and points out what's happening with the poor, with those who are forgotten. For example, the Beatitudes, if you look at Matthew and Luke, Matthew says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit." Luke says, "Blessed are the poor." There's a very different kind of emphasis with those two things. We find the same is true with this, with our story for today. It's the story of Anna and of Simeon. It's one that really doesn't get much press, honestly, in the church. And it's a really interesting story. Let's take a look at Anna, for example, the second one who encountered Jesus in the temple that Betsy read about this morning. Here's what we know about Anna. We know that she was from the tribe of Asher. This is one of the 12 tribes of Israel. What we also know, or what has been pieced together about Anna, is that during the exile, let me just mention what that is briefly. The exile was when the Israelites were taken into captivity by the Babylonians. It was a period of 70-some years where much of the crux of what we know as the Jewish faith and much of what Christianity comes from was recorded and what happened. So the exile was really the defining thing for the Jewish folks and also for many Christians now, the trickle-down effect of that. So Anna comes from a family that was in a different part of the exile, essentially, than, say, Simeon's family. And honestly, that sort of part of the exile, it's called Medea, was kind of, not really well known. They had some different types of scriptures as well. The folks that came out of that part of the exile valued the Apocrypha as well as the Hebrew scriptures. Are you all familiar with the Apocrypha at all? Anyone out there? It's sort of, the Catholic folks really value the Apocrypha. Some other different types of Christianity also do too. Anyway, the Apocrypha was a big deal for the folks in this particular portion of the exile. Why this matters is this, is that Anna was named after the main character's wife in this particular story of the Tobit, as it is called. So her father was a guy named Phanuel, who we can only imagine spent a lot of time with his daughter telling her stories about their history, about what it meant for their people to be in exile and to be in this particular part of the exile. And certainly one of those stories was also about the wife of Tobit, this woman named Anna, who was a devout woman of God. And certainly we can kind of conjecture that that's why he named his daughter Anna. So we can sort of imagine this young girl having planted inside of her these seeds of a dream, of a vision, for when all of the exiles would be finally returned to their homeland, when all of the exiles would be one body. Anna was, as is no surprise, married off very young, as most women were at that age, in that time. So probably around 13 or 14, we're told that she lived with her husband for 7 years. This means she was probably widowed by the age of 20. So Anna then spent what we know the rest of her life really in service to the temple in terms of fasting and prayer and praising. So you can kind of imagine this woman who, when we meet her today, is in her mid-80s, that she's probably kind of eccentric, right? You can kind of imagine that she's sort of this free-spirited, mystic, eccentric, sort of crazy about God kind of person that you might might create a wide arc around if you were to meet. Who knows? But there she was in the temple day in and day out, praising God and apparently blessing children. We are told she obviously recognized Jesus, said a prayer of thanksgiving and of blessing for this baby. But there's nothing that says she didn't do that for every other male baby that was born and brought to the temple. We don't know. We just know this one encounter. And then there is Simeon. Now, this is the only place that Simeon is mentioned in our scripture, and we really know nothing about this man. We have much more detail about Anna for some reason, but very little about Simeon. But Simeon gets a little bit more press. Now, what we know is that Simeon apparently had made a deal with God, and that said he asked God, God, please just let me live until I get to see the Messiah, till I can lay my own eyes on the hope of the world. And then you can take me. Then I'm good to go. So sure enough, Mary and Joseph bring the baby in, and Simeon recognizes him and knows that this is his moment. His moment has come, and he sings this beautiful song, the Song of Simeon. In some churches, it's in Latin, it's known as the Nunc Dimittis, which just simply means now you dismiss. And it's a pretty well-known passage and song of now let your servant go in peace. My eyes have seen the glory of the Lord. My eyes have seen the hope of Israel. I can now depart in peace. Simeon says some very surprising things to Mary. Our passage tells us that both Mary and Joseph were amazed at the things that were being said. And you kind of have to wonder how they were still amazed. Right? I mean, angels had come. They had a baby in a barn. There were animals around. There was a star that led all these folks to them. Kings came and gave them all these amazing gifts. Shepherds came and bowed down and worshiped this brand new peasant baby laying in a trough. So the fact that 40 days later they were still amazed is kind of interesting. But they were. And they may have been amazed because not only did both of these wise old souls recognize their baby and perhaps even remind them of who he was, but also Simeon said some pretty difficult things. One, he said, this is the light to the nations. This is the hope of the Gentiles. Now, really, Simeon is referring to Isaiah, the book of Isaiah, because this is said multiple times throughout Isaiah. And anyone who heard him would have known that's what he was referring to. And it's not a new thing he's referring to. He's basically saying, Jesus did not just come for our people. Jesus came for everyone. And this was not new news. If anyone was doing their reading, this was old news. But then the other thing that Simeon said is, he's also going to pierce your heart, Mary and Joseph. Your baby will pierce your heart. Also, your baby is going to reveal many things about the hearts of all people. Makes me think about the first chapter of John where it says the light has come into the world. You know, it's the only mention that John makes of the birth. We ascribe that to the birth. This idea of this bright light coming into the world, and here we have Simeon saying, but this light is going to cast into the light for all to see the contents of all human hearts. As Fred Craddock, who's a late but beloved preacher, would always say about this passage, we're reminded that light always also casts shadows. Now, another thing about Miss Anna. Any of you out there remember a certain story about a woman named Hannah from way back when in the Old Testament, 1 Samuel? There was a woman named Hannah. Anybody remember this? She wanted a baby. There's lots of wanting of babies. So she wanted a baby. She couldn't have a child and prayed to have a child. And she became pregnant. And she said to God, if I'm able to have a baby, I will immediately give my child up to you to be your servant, to be trained in your courts, to be one of your prophets. Sure enough, she had a baby. His name was Samuel. And she immediately turned Samuel over to Eli to be trained up and to be brought up. So Samuel was literally raised in the temple. Now, certainly any good Jewish folks at the time would have known very much about Hannah and Samuel and Eli. When Hannah receives the news that she too is pregnant, she sings a song. It's called the Song of Hannah. It is really, if you put it next to the Song of Mary, when Mary receives the same news, it is almost exactly like it. They're very, very similar. This was not an accident. They were written this way to show there's a connection here. So then we run into Anna, and in some translations of this story in our New Testament, the actual Greek could be either translated Anna or Hannah. There's an H that for some is silent, but some translations do have Hannah. This was not an accident either. So we have this sort of triune women, if you will, this trinity of women, from the Old Testament to Mary and then to our older Hannah. Does that make sense at all? This sort of trinity of mother, of maiden, mother, and crone, if you will, which is a powerhouse trinity for women of God, right? So with Hannah, with Mary, you have this maiden who's very reluctantly becoming a mother at a time that she was not planning on becoming a mother, but she's accepting it and stepping into it. She's not quite there yet. And then you have Hannah sort of in the shadows that Mary is kind of modeled after as well, who desperately wanted to be a mother and who also gave up her child for the service of God. And then you have Anna, this old eccentric mystic woman in the temple, who's also been waiting for this day to say her blessings and her praises. It's a good reminder of the different stages of life and the things that those have to offer. It's a good reminder of the incredible payoff of patience and waiting and promise and, well, courage and obedience. So, why do we think that Luke included this particular story in this gospel? It's a question that many have asked over the years. One good reason is that the author was wanting to show that Jesus' parents, though young and though clearly this probably wasn't their first choice of how their life would have gone, that they were very observant, that they were very obedient. So 40 days after the birth of the child, it was customary to take, first of all, the woman for purification from childbirth, and then two, the firstborn male to be dedicated to God for the service of God. And here was this, poor peasant couple making the trip to do that. That says something about who they were, that they did this. It's also a reminder to us that Jesus came for all people. Simeon reminds us of that, hammers that home, that Jesus came for all people, not just the Jews, not just those who vote like we do, not just those who look like we do, but that Jesus really came for all people. I think Luke also included it because it is the only place in our New Testament where there's actually a female prophet. It's the only one, Anna, and it's just a few verses, but it's a few rich verses. I think, too, what Simeon said, your child will pierce your own heart. Your child, though, is also going to lay bare the hearts and the contents of the hearts of all people, is a reminder for us as well. We've waited and waited and waited for the birth of a baby, and it's much easier to celebrate the birth of a baby. I mean, Christmas is a lot easier to preach about than Good Friday. But that's always where this birth leads every year. So we have this baby we've been waiting for and longing for, and yet there's a reality of what this baby does. Jesus doesn't always meet the expectations of everyone who's been waiting and hoping for him. Jesus is on his own mission. Jesus is his own person, who we see is very dedicated to God here. And part of that is, well, it won't always be peaceful in the way that we want things to be peaceful. Works towards peace, but it means a cleaning out. It means letting the light shine on everything kind of peace. The Gospel of Thomas, which is not in our canon, but actually was probably written around the same time as the Gospel of John, probably one of the most well-known verses from the Gospel of Thomas, speaks to this as well, and it says, "If you bring forth what is in you, what is within you will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, that which you do not bring forth will destroy you." I think there's a similar kind of sentiment here with Simeon in this gospel. This passage is often placed in the lectionary for this particular Sunday, the Sunday after Christmas, as it is this year. I think that there are a couple of reasons for that as well. One is we're reminded about what it means to be grateful. Anna is grateful. I mean, she's just hanging out in the temple, praising God all the time, this pretty eccentric, mystic kind of woman. And then when she sees the baby, she is just praising and giving thanks. And I have to go back to wondering again about Mary and Joseph and that. They're still amazed this is happening. Maybe they also needed a reminder to be thankful. This was hard, and yet they continued to be cared for. And yet they continued to figure out ways to make it work with this new baby. We can all use reminders of gratitude, I think, especially perhaps this time of year. We rush often through this season. We have Thanksgiving, we think about what it means to be thankful, and then it's on. It's like the game is on, and we rush through this season to get to this place in the new year, and whatever that means. There was an article in the New York Times right after Thanksgiving, actually right before, sort of targeted towards Black Friday, and it was about gratitude versus willpower. And it was this great little article just basically saying, people talk about what does it mean to have willpower in terms of many things, but this was focusing on buying and spending, taking advantage of all of those sort of midnight deals or not. And looking at the science, it was a study actually, looking at the science of what gratitude can do. And this amazing evidence that gratitude helps us just be content with what we have. That it's so different from having to muster up some sort of willpower for whatever it is, more food, more something, more, whatever it is. The force of gratitude is so much more powerful than that. So I want us to think about that for a minute. And if you would, pull out either your bulletin or if there's a blank piece of paper in the pew and something to write with. And I want you just to think for a minute about this past year and about five things that you are grateful for. Let's also move beyond some of the things. I mean, I think we're all pretty grateful for the basics of life. We're fortunate in having those. We're fortunate in having a place to live and most of the time food. So let's challenge yourself here of some things that you particularly are grateful for this year. Even maybe the things that you didn't want to have happen. Even maybe some of the things that you particularly were not grateful for at one point. So take 3 minutes, write down 5 things you're grateful for. right, how we doing? Do you have your 5 things? Okay, good. Are these things that you can share with somebody? You would feel comfortable sharing with someone? I'm getting some yeses and some nos, understandably. I would challenge you to share them with someone. I'm not going to make you turn to a stranger right now and do so, but I would encourage you to share them with someone. I will briefly say a word about mine as I've thought about this. I'm incredibly grateful for you all. I'm grateful for the opportunity to again and again stand up here and get to kind of have a one-way conversation. I'm grateful to know you more. I'm grateful for being in my 2nd year of ministry here with you all. Thank you. I'm grateful for now being ordained for a year. These are things I'm very much grateful for. I'm grateful for my dog, day in and day out, for her sweet wet nose and for her tail. It kind of knocks things over. I'm incredibly grateful to my wife and to her family for the privilege of being married, and that is something that has also been very new and even very possible for me in the very recent history of our world. I'm incredibly grateful to have been taken in by this incredibly gracious and generous and loving and accepting family on so many levels. And I'm also grateful and excited for all of the changes that are coming our way. We don't exactly know what those are going to be, but I'm grateful for open doors and for new possibilities. So again, I would encourage you to share these things with someone.